They're able to understand what love is because they've encountered a true form of love out there. And they understand what we all learn eventually over time, that the love that we're trying to give on this earth is just an imitation of the love that we experienced up here in the spiritual realm. So last time we got all the way past, we got to the death of Socrates, didn't we?
Oh.
I explained about the hemlock and the death?
Yeah.
Oh, the poison?
Yeah, the poison. Okay, good. All right. So just to review this real quick, this is a really important concept. It isn't just about politics. This forms the kind of the core central idea of what he's getting at with this question of how do we know what we know. Remember, to him, the highest form of government, the ideal state, is called aristocracy. He acknowledges that this has never existed before, and he questions whether or not it ever could possibly exist. But he's putting it out there saying the best that we can possibly imagine is this one form of government. Now, every form of government that comes after that is an imitation of this one. So this one is based on wisdom and reason, best possible things. But he acknowledges that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for us to actually establish that system. So therefore, the best system that we can possibly have on earth, maybe, is the democracy, which is based on honor. But honor itself is only an imitation of wisdom and reason. It's not wisdom and reason itself, it's just an imitation of it. Does that make sense? And then everything that degenerates from there is simply an imitation of the thing that's above it. So the problem with using wealth as the metric is that wealth is just an imitation of honor, which is itself only an imitation of wisdom and reason. And the problem with democracy is that it's an imitation of the oligarchy, which is an imitation of the democracy, which is the imitation of the ideal state, and so forth down to tyranny. So by the time you get here, you have an imitation of an imitation of an imitation of an imitation of the ideal thing itself. According to Socrates, we should always aspire to this thing right here. Or as someone from last period put it, aim for the stars, but negotiate on the moon. So you establish your sights on something that's far out there, it's perfect, ideal, what you actually would want to attain if you could attain anything, and then you shoot for it. And if you don't get it, hopefully you will get closer than you were when you started, at least. Hopefully you get very close to it, which would be the democracy, which is why he admired Sparta so much. He believed that's where they were. So the important thing is that concept of there being an ideal thing out there and everything else being an imitation of that ideal thing. All right, moving over the trial death of Socrates, I talked about impiety corrupting the youth, I believe. I talked about the daimonian. I talked about him ingesting the poison and all of that, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Then we got to this question of why was Socrates so willing to die? I think this is where we left off, yes? Okay. All right. This is the central idea of everything that Socrates is getting at. This idea of the forms. The forms. We have an ideal cat. Let me explain. Socrates believed that before you were born in this physical realm, you existed already. I jumped ahead of myself, sorry. So what Socrates wants to answer is this question of how do we know what we know? Because how we answer that question, he believes, is going to point to this question of whether or not we have an immortal soul. He believes that it really is that big of a question. So I was talking last time that if I asked the typical Westerner, how do you know what you know? We say, oh, I experience things. I see it with my five senses. I've seen it, I've heard it, I've touched it, smelled it, and tasted it. But we also pointed out that our five senses do deceive us sometimes. They're faulty. So then we have to acknowledge that, therefore, we work off of faulty knowledge. The upshot to that is that we have a thing called true belief, a lot of times. We have a belief that happens to be true, but that we have true knowledge about very few things. Now here's the problem. There are things in your life that you know, that you've never experienced before. You couldn't possibly have experienced it before. So for example, you have a physical body, and your physical body came into existence. When did your physical body come into existence? When you were born. Okay? So that means that your body had a beginning point. When is your body going to end? When you die. So you're trapped into this ability to only understand a physical world. But here's the thing. You understand something like eternity. How could you possibly know about eternity if you've never experienced it before? Well, I heard about it. Okay, how did that person know about eternity, though? Because we have to deal with the original idea. Where did this thing come from? Here's a thought experiment. Tell me something that's never existed before. Tell me something tell me something that doesn't exist and give it a name.
Flying cars.
Oh, we have flying cars. And we have a concept of flying, and we have a concept of cars, and you just put them together. Tell me something completely original that's never existed before, and have a name for it.
A tiger with 10 legs.
What's that?
A tiger with 10 legs.
I can't hear you.
A tiger with 10 legs.
A tire with 10 legs. You took a tire, which exists.
No, a tiger.
A tiger.
Yeah.
You take a tiger, which exists, and you take the concept of 10 legs, well, 10, and then legs, and you put them all together into one thing. I'm saying give me a concept that's entirely original.
You can.
Exactly. You can't. You cannot. So this is not a small thing about how can we possibly have a concept of eternity if we've never experienced it before. You've experienced tigers, you've experienced the number 10, you've experienced legs, you've experienced, it's just putting things together. Take a Wookiee. Take a human being, make him look like a bear, put them together, that's what you've got, a Wookiee. So the point is that you've never experienced this thing called eternity. But somehow you know what it is. You've never experienced this thing called perfection before. You use the word, but you don't actually use it in the way that to describe what it really means. You might be eating a cheeseburger and say, oh, this is the perfect cheeseburger. It's not the perfect cheeseburger. There are flaws with it. All that you mean to say is it's really good. You're misapplying the word. But you're misapplying the word in pursuit of an understanding of a concept. So you have an understanding of what perfection is, although you've never seen it before. You've never experienced it before. So if it's true, all of our knowledge comes from our 5 senses, then we shouldn't have a word for perfection. We shouldn't have a word for eternity. But we do. And that's what Socrates is trying to understand. So to answer that, he comes up with this thing called the forms. The forms. And again, this is the central idea behind what we're going to read, the Allegory of the Cave. The forms means that before you were born, he believed that you were an eternal soul. That you ran around out in the cosmos and you interacted with these things called the forms, which are like the ideas. The perfect ideas, the ideal ideas of things. So that's where you learned about eternity, because you were an eternal soul. You experienced it firsthand, not with your 5 senses, but with your psyche. If we recall that this is what Jung calls your psyche. It's your consciousness, it's your awareness, it's the things that go in your unconscious, which we'll get there. But when you're out there is no unconscious, there's only an eternal conscious. You are aware of everything. So while you're running around, you encounter this idea of eternity. You encounter this idea of perfection, because your soul is perfect. It's flawless. It doesn't die, it's never born, it doesn't corrupt, it never decays. This is you. That's the essence of who you are. This physical body is not you. If you change your hair color and come in tomorrow, you're still the same person. If you lose one arm, you're still the same person. If you lose 2 arms, same person. Both legs. No matter what parts of your body you change or are lost, you are still you. We understand that intuitively. If you're walking down the street, or yet, you go and you rob a bank, and on your way out of the bank, the cops are waiting for you, so you run back in, and I don't know, the cops they're feisty that day. So they roll a grenade in there, and it blows off both of your legs, let's say. And then you go into court, and you're being wheeled in, and they have a video of this person robbing the bank, and you go, that's not me. That guy's got 2 legs. I've got no legs. Well, yeah, but you had 2 legs back then. No, that's a completely different person. My body has changed, therefore that person is not me. We all laugh at that. We know that that's stupid. So intuitively we know that you are not your body. Instead, you're this thing called your psyche, your mind, all of your experiences together. Now, while you're out there, you didn't just encounter perfection or eternity. You encountered a chair. In other words, the perfect idea of what a chair is supposed to be. And then you encountered perfection, eternity. You encountered love, and like the proper forms of love, not just infatuation, but you understand all the different forms of love and how they can come together. You encountered, I don't know, a car. In fact, you learned what a perfect car is, so you know that that's not the perfect car. It's like a roller skate, but you get the idea. It's supposed to be a car. I'll label it so we know. But the only reason you know that that's not a good car is because you're comparing what I just drew on the board to your memory of the ideal thing that you encountered out there. That's why, by the way, you're not out there by yourself. There's also other people out there as well, and you're encountering other people. And that's why it is that sometimes you'll meet a person and you'll be like, God, I feel so comfortable with this person. I feel like I've known him forever. Maybe you did. Maybe you have. And that person was born, and then you were born, different places, maybe even separated by a little bit of time. But when you encounter that person, you're like, oh, yeah, it's like I have a connection with that person. I'm not sure why. Maybe that's why. Because you encountered them out here in this intellectual world. We can call this the spiritual world. We can call it the intellectual world. And then, one day, your parents hook up. I'll leave it at that so that you don't have to spend years in therapy, but you get the idea. And then 9 months later, you're born. And the process of being born into a physical body, pulling this eternal soul out of a spiritual realm, and dropping you into a body is so traumatic, you have completely forgotten everything that you knew. All of what you knew is now pushed from your consciousness into your personal unconscious. And of course, into the collective unconscious as well. And so, you ever see a baby who's been born, like a newborn, and they're like, what the hell just happened? It's like they just got pulled from here. They're like screaming through the cosmos, this is great! All of a sudden it is, I feel weird. And then boom! And as they're holding them, they're looking at, the mom, and then like, kind of look over the corner, and they see that thing over there, that black thing against the cupboard or the cabinet. And you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of this thing I encountered out here in the spiritual world, a chair. It looks like an imitation of this, because that one right there is not as good as this one. But I get what they're going for. They're trying to imitate this. And then they can see, I don't know, a pair of glasses. They've encountered the idea of a pair of glasses out there. Their mother is telling them, oh my God, I love this baby right here. They're able to understand what love is, because they've encountered their true form of love out there. And they understand what we all learn eventually over time, that the love that we're trying to give on this earth is just an imitation of the love that we experienced up here in the spiritual realm. Sometimes it's closer to that, sometimes it's farther away from that. That's also how we recognize when a person loves us or doesn't love us. Intuitively we know, this thing that you're giving me, it doesn't quite resemble this thing I experienced as being the perfect form of love. And that's why we're always seeking this thing up here. That's why we can't really be satisfied with what we have here, because we know what the real thing is. That's why death bothers us so much, because we realize that we're eternal beings, and that we realize that a part of us, which is this body, is going to die. That's contrary to who we are, and so that's why it bothers us. So this is why we're always seeking perfection, because we know what it is. We've seen it before. And this is why when people will say things like, you've got to be okay with not being perfect. Like, if you want to piss me off, just tell me. Scalen, you got to realize, man, you're human. I hate that. I hate that. It's weird. Like, in the past week, I've had like 7 people tell me, hey, Scalen, you're human. Some students from second period were in here during nutrition, and one of them told me that. I said, yeah, I have to go to the bathroom. I left. I was just telling them that. It bothers me. Because when people say that, a lot of times, they use it as like an excuse to settle into something. I realize what my DNA is, of course. But I don't accept the idea that, well, you can't expect perfection out of yourself because you're human. Because once you accept that, you've accepted yourself being something other than what you possibly could be. This is what your nature is. And this is why even when you say, well, I'm only human, I'm not perfect, there's still something that gnaws away at you. Because you realize that you are perfect, and that's the thing that we should be aiming at, striving for. Perfect love, eternity. A perfect chair, a perfect car. And so what that means is that as you go through life, I'm not sure if you guys can see my little stick person down here, but that's why your mind is broken up into these things here, where you've got your personal consciousness, the stuff that you're aware of, and you've also got that mid-level of the personal unconscious. All of those things that you experienced up there. And then one day, you're walking down the street, and I don't know, somebody asks you, I don't know, what's the capital of California? Whatever, something. And you know the answer, Sacramento. And you're like, how did I know? That's interesting. How did I possibly know that? Because the person asked the right question. It unlocked that memory and took something from your unconscious, brought it up into your consciousness. You notice that when we were talking during the quote, I didn't tell you a lot of stuff. I kept asking you questions. I kept asking you guys questions, because you guys already know the answer. How is it that, well, what is What does the fear of Elvis tell us about this person? How can we treat it? It doesn't even have to be a real case, because we apply it all the same way. So all I have to do is ask, all I have to do, that's a terrible thing to say. Because you know whenever someone says all you have to do is, whatever comes after that is usually bullshit. So what I need to do instead is ask you the proper combination of questions. And if I can ask you the proper combination of questions, I don't have to sit there and tell you, here's what your fear of Elvis says about you. Instead, you're going to realize it about yourself. And then you're going to realize a whole bunch of other things about yourself. It becomes this flood that can kind of now overwhelm your mind. You realize, wow, I have a tool now where I can figure out a lot of stuff about myself. Wow, Scanlon's a brilliant teacher. That's true. Or not. What it is that I just asked you the right questions. And that's what a proper teacher will do. They'll ask you the right questions to get you to figure things out for yourself, because you already know. I need to bring things out of your unconscious into your conscious. And so, this is not where you belong. This is a very temporary thing. How long is this going to last? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It could last 100 years. It could last 200 years. It could last 18 years. Some of you, this may be the last time I ever see you. I don't know how long this is going to last. But it doesn't really matter so much. Don't be in a rush to have this end, because there's a lot of stuff in this physical world that you can learn from. You can meet people. You can have experiences. There's a lot of stuff that you can't do once you're out of here. So don't be in a rush for the inevitable, but just understand what your true nature is. You existed for eternity before this state right here. And you're going to exist for eternity after this state. Because as soon as you die, you're going back to where you came from, where you belong. And this is why some of you, I'm sure, walk around just thinking like, I don't feel like I belong here. You don't. You don't. This is not your world. This is a physical realm. You are something that's non-physical, and you're having to operate within something physical. It's awkward. It's clumsy. You look at yourself in the mirror and you don't like what you see. Of course not. Because what you saw before was perfection. And what you see now is something that's less than that. Don't be so hard on yourself, man. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. The you that really exists. You know, it's this physical matter, man. You ever make Christmas cookies before? Ever make cookies before? You use cookie cutters? And you put them in the oven. Well, first you get the cookie dough, and you put them on the cookie pan, and the stars, perfectly shaped, right? Sharp edges and all that. And then you bake them, they come out. Are those edges still sharp? No. It's not your fault. Is that because you're a terrible baker? No. It's physical matter. It's material. It's the ingredients of the dough. It's the temperature of the oven. It even has to do with the altitude at which you're baking. Nothing you can do about it. You should do the best that you possibly can with what you have. But sometimes you're just cookie dough, man. And you're doing the best that you possibly can with what you have. Good news is, once you return up here, you get to go back to your perfect nature and be the thing that you really, really are. You know? You've lost some friends along the way. If you haven't yet, you will. Or maybe you're the friend who's going to be lost along the way at some point. I don't know. But you'll get to see him again. You get up here. And this is why Socrates is not afraid to die. He's looking forward to it. Obviously, he's not in a rush to do it because he's 71 years old. So it's not like he just says, I'm going to get there, and then goes jumping off the Cornell Bridge. Don't do that. Don't do that. Experience as much as you possibly can here, but be encouraged also. Because what's the worst thing that can possibly happen to you in life?
Yeah.
You die. And guess what? You're going to. You're going to. And as soon as you really internalize that, there's something liberating about it. Because now you realize the worst thing that can possibly happen to me is going to happen to me. So I guess my question now is, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Oh, I'm gonna try to establish a business. Oh, but what if I fail and I go bankrupt? Ooh. So you're gonna die. You're worried about going bankrupt. You're gonna die. You know? Oh, I'm gonna ask my crush out. I'm gonna take a chance. In fact, let me get bold. I'm just gonna kiss my crush. See what happens.
Jail.
Yeah. What's the worst that happens? You're in jail. Oh, jail. No, the worst that happens is you get rejected. And it's like, what the hell is your... You get yelled at, you get screamed at. And then, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And you feel terrible about it, but think about when you go and tell your friends this story. All of a sudden it goes from, oh my God, did something terrible, now your friends start making fun of you, and now it's a funny story. You know? What's the worst that happens? Oh, you get embarrassed, and then there's a funny story about it. Who cares? You're going to die. You know? You really want to die thinking of all the things that you didn't try? When you ask people what their regrets are in life, the number one regret that people have in the short term, it typically tends to be like, I think number 3 is something that you tried that didn't work out. When you ask old people, though, people over 60, what their number one regrets are, it's 100%, it's always the things that they didn't try, the things that they didn't go for. So in the short term, we're worried about embarrassment. If we can get over the embarrassment of things, then we're willing to try more things. We're going to have way fewer regrets in life at the end. But like I said, you're going to die. So what are you worried about? And when you die, it ain't the end, man. You're going here. You're going back to where you came from. And you're going to experience things again, and again, and again, and again. Always new, always fresh, even though you've been there before. Like watching an old movie that you love, with people you love, doing the things that you love, being exactly who you really are. And that's the forms. Questions?
So like, for perfection, are we all living in like the same, or like, I guess how I'm thinking about it is like, if we're in the same universe, if we are living in the same universe, do we have the same idea of perfection, or each of them?
Yeah, we all know what it is. We've all experienced it before. There's only one form of it. What causes us to think differently about it is our different human experiences, which we've had through our 5 senses, which are corruptible. That's why we experience things differently. If we could cleanse those doors of perception, then we would see things as they truly are, which is infinite. If we could get rid of these biases and these prejudices and all these other things, we would all agree on what this is. We would all agree on what this is, which tells us, because by the way, there's another thing that we've experienced out there before that we maybe have not experienced much of in this world, which is harmony. We start to realize that there's a perfect harmony to things. There's no disagreement. And we might think like, but isn't disagreement something that makes us interesting and exciting? If you like drama, I suppose so. But what really makes, the reason that we like disagreement is because we grow from it. You've already grown when you're out here. There's nowhere else to grow. You're there. You're exactly as you should be. And you'll experience things differently, of course, but we agree on these concepts. Because we know what they are. We've encountered the thing itself. Yeah.
So like with the whole heaven and hell thing, it's like we say there's that like after we die, right? But we don't really know what heaven and hell is. So it's like, how do we know about it? Like, what's the difference between that?
So that becomes a question. Think about how those things are described, heaven and hell. They're described in linear terms there. So like, for example, what is hell like? Tricky question, by the way. But we're talking about, for example, the Bible. How does the Bible describe hell?
Like
Everlasting
torture.
torment?
But it's not. That's what's fascinating. Hell is described as separation from God. And it's described as being total darkness, basically sensory deprivation. We think of it as fire. That's because there's the analogy made between hell and Gehenna. And Gehenna is an area outside of Jerusalem where people would go and burn the trash. So there's something there about things being burned away. And it's used as an analogy of what hell is like. But it doesn't say that you therefore sit in fire and you're burned for all of eternity. Essentially, it's described as a separation from God and complete and total darkness. Because they say God is light. So what's the opposite of God? Darkness. What's heaven? So what's the opposite of heaven? Hell. So you think of everything that heaven is supposed to be. God is present. There's light. So on, so on, so on. There's sensory understanding. And then you get to hell. It's dark. Separation from God. And you can't experience things because you're essentially it's a sensory deprivation. We oftentimes think of it also like Satan is going to be down there torturing us. No, that's not what it says anyway. It says that hell was created for the angels, not for humans, and that Satan will be there being punished as well. And that's the creepy part. It doesn't say he's there right now. If you're a Christian, in fact, if you're a Christian, does anybody know where it says that Satan is? It's in 2 places. He's here on earth, yes, he's also in heaven. That's weird, because it says he's up there accusing you constantly. Basically sitting there going like, hey, did you see Sebastian? See what he did? See what he just thought? Dude, look what he's doing right now. Do you see it? Do you see it? That's his job, is to be up there constantly pointing out everything that you're doing wrong. Like your mother. I was going to say stepmom, but whatever. Make it more Disney. So the ideas of heaven and hell would come from that. The idea that we're combining things that we understand, eternity. But there is a really interesting thing in there, by the way. Sensory deprivation. The concept of nothingness. We've never encountered nothingness before. And yet we understand what nothingness is. And that's a really trippy thing, by the way. You might think like, well, if I close my eyes, is that nothingness? No, you're encountering black, you're encountering colors, you're encountering new thoughts. You're not encountering nothingness. But we understand what nothingness is. Yeah. Nothingness. It's a trip, man. Just by asking, how do we know what we know? That's where it leads. Alright. Wow, that's fast. That's good. I'm going to post that video. That one's short.